Now that we've got the basic shapes blocked in from the first session, we're going to spend some time establishing a fairly strong, fairly accurate value statement for the piece. And this one's got pretty nice clear values, so I think we spoke about it in the last, or in the first session of the drawing. But we've got this really dark sort of clothing and back of the head, which is in shadow. We've got a kind of mid-grey backdrop, and then slightly lighter moving into that mid-grey tones through the darker half tones in the face, and some notes in the face which are about as dark as the hair. So I'm just going to be using, probably for most of it, these little kind of older sections of B charcoals that I'm going to go through, because we don't need to be super accurate for this. So we just want to kind of lay in the charcoal to about the right value. Don't have to go too much more specific with our shapes at this point. We're worrying more about values. And initially just keeping it to that, those three values that I just mentioned basically. Stick somewhere, so I don't want to touch the paper while I'm laying on this much charcoal. It's a bit of mahl stick to keep my hand off the paper while I'm laying this in. So these are the sections that are going to go really dark. So you can see moving down the back of the head here, because this shadow behind the ear goes so dark, I'm just grouping it in, and this little bit that reaches down, just merging that with the hat value, because really not much of a change. It's something we'll probably find in terms of being a detail, some kind of aspects of details we'll find a little bit later. I'm also just going to adjust the shape slightly curving back. So we've got our kind of big hat value blocked in. And I just want to put in, so there's this darker shape. So I'm using a slightly more sharpened HB to do this. It's got this one darker shape that sits within the glasses frame, which then drops down. This bit here goes pretty dark. Got another little dark shape just there. Then we've got our shapes in the face, which are pretty much black. Underneath the nose, and then down here in the lips. And a pretty dark value down the front of that lower lip. And then that just starts to merge, and we can swap back to our B now. That merges in with this clothing. Just making a correction to that little bit of tone that went a little bit too far over. So not going to worry too much again about the slighter value shifts, the more subtle value shifts down in this drapery below. You can go quite a bit looser as you get down into the parts of the drapery further away from the face, like we often do, so things loosen off down. Away from the kind of focal point and more detailed section of the drawing. So we've got our kind of heavier black tone in now, our darkest tone. So we can now go in and start figuring out relative to that how dark we want to go for this background. Because it's not connected to too much, we can kind of go almost as dark as we like. We can also go in and even this out later, so you don't have to worry too much about being super neat. We will be a little bit neater with those portions of the background that meet up. With the front of the profile. Just because we don't want to spill over and put loads of tone somewhere that needs to remain a little bit lighter. But as soon as we move away from there, we can kind of loosen off again. In terms of kind of strokes, in terms of how you're drawing, you can do it however you like, so you can work in different directions to this. Whatever sort of feels good, and as I say, it's something we'll be coming back to. But the main purpose is just get kind of a reasonably even tone, a tone that suggests the value of the backdrop, because that's what we're going to be using to make judgments about the values in the face once we actually start to render that. So if you've got any like really patchy areas, you might want to start smoothing them out a little bit now, but you don't have to do loads. If you do start a little bit darker, it can be beneficial, because like here where I'm evening out, obviously my approach to evening out generally is making stuff darker. But if you do need to lighten something off, you can always just form your kneadable eraser into a point and just erase it up a little bit, like that. It's not too bad for that backdrop now. So the final thing we want to kind of get going at this point in the drawing is we want to start suggesting those values in the face, kind of primary values. I might just as a final thing, looking at it, I think it's a bit distracting having this little white section in the vignette below, so we're just going to get rid of that. That's the sort of decision you can kind of make on the fly, depending on how things are working. I think that's a little bit neat to know. So now that we've got that in place, go back to my HB, and I might at this stage just start blocking in some of those shapes for the ear, because it's starting to stand out as a little bit too stark. We do have a video for drawing ears if you ever struggle with that as well on the channel, so you can have a look through for that after you've watched this. Just looking for those little barrels through the ear. So we've got that kind of ear sort of slightly blocked in now, which is good. So now that we've got that there, I can put line across for that section of glass frame. I've got this little shadow that sticks out as well. So we've got most of our larger values in place now. But the final one is we do want to start adding some tone in for the head as well. So next thing we're going to do is start adjusting these values in the head. neck. I'm just doing a rough approximation. The values get a bit darker. Here are the darker halftones. And also using those sort of little halftone sections we mapped into the structure of the face, we can at this point just start blocking in larger panels. Of tone in a pretty general way. Got a little crease in the paper there that we'll have to deal with, but probably not today. Looking at the values in the reference, just generally where things need to go a bit darker, they go darker, and we keep them light where they need to stay light. I don't want to go too dark kind of near the front of the face because we are going to be putting highlights in. We're going to be using some chalk. So keep that reasonably light in the front there, but that's something we're going to figure out in detail. Probably next week we'll get that in. Will be an important thing for the overall sort of value statement of the drawing. But we're almost there for this week, so you want to do, cannot overload yourself too much and do too much more than this. This is a good level in terms of detail to get to at this stage of the drawing. Then you can leave it and return to it later. I'm just going to start marking in some of those places where it goes, starts to go really dark down in the drapery. It's possible to get some slightly darker tones than I already had. So starting to get a bit more of a sense just by doing that of the shapes in that drapery. And we'll do the same thing up here. So we just want to separate out this folded up portion of the beanie. Thinking a bit about direction of our drawing strokes. And also want to get a nice dark tone in behind this ear. So the final thing we can do today, I'm pretty happy with that general establishment of values in the drawing. So you can see relative to the reference, it gives us a really good starting point for rendering in detail. And doesn't take too long, so you don't have to fuss too much. You can see it's not super neat. The last thing I'm going to do is just spend a little bit more time. I'm just going to give my charcoal a bit of a sharpen and then just do a little bit of neatening out. Do a little bit of neatening out across the piece. So you don't want to necessarily be rendering exactly at this point, but just anywhere it seems a little bit too patchy, you can start to even out. A little bit in the background if need be as well, particularly nearer the head, so the closer we get to the head the more we want that to be neatened out. But that's pretty much it for today, I think. Yeah, pretty happy with that. So about this level is what you're aiming for in terms of finish for this stage of the drawing, and then you can keep an eye out for, I think it'll be in 2 weeks time, the next session, where we'll be carrying this on, and you'll see how you can go about rendering and also how you can start to incorporate some highlights in white in the piece. But yeah, that's it for today. As always, you can subscribe to the channel to get a bunch more videos like this, or regular videos like this. And if you click the link through to OCAD's page, you can sign up for a bunch of art courses that are tutored with myself and a range of expert teachers. But yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys soon.